I'll just get right into it, because I only have a few minutes really, about a half hour or so. I believe you have most of the information on here, so the data you'll see here you'll be able to refer to. But as we all know, there's a lot of pressure on budgets at clubs these days. And, there's a couple of different reasons why that, and we all know what they are. One of the biggest reasons has been the growth in club membership across clubs with golf. And that's created pressure from the membership experience side. While at the same time, we've seen what we've seen on the labor market. It's like what we spent a great deal of time talking about here today. So the difficulty in recruiting and finding staff, number one, which we'll talk about here in the data, and then the rise in the inflation of wages and the impact that's had on clubs. And when we looked at 2021 data, we've done this 2 years in a row now. We did this survey for the first time about a year ago, and then we returned to it in August of this year as a follow-up to see where things are. So we measured the difficulty in recruiting, number one, and then we looked at the average wages in all of our hourly operations, and we looked at the average maximum wage in clubs. And we went back to 2019 instead of looking at 2020, because 2020 was kind of a, well, strange. So when we looked at that, then we said, okay, because historically, when we look at the club data, and we study financial results of 1,000 clubs a year. We've done that since 2009. And we have over 800 clubs in our platform as we speak that we study intensely. One of the things that we learned pre-pandemic was there's a direct correlation, at the median at least, and it's not a rule of thumb, but it is a data point to be concerned with in this day and age, and that is the relationship between payroll dollars and dues revenue. And at the median before the pandemic, that ratio was almost 1-to-1, okay? And so when you see the increase in wages that we've had over the last couple of seasons, the increase in numbers of members at clubs with golf especially, and you look at the magnitude of dues increases compared with the magnitude of wage inflation, how are we reconciling that going forward? So that's why we looked at dues increases each of the last couple of years. So I'll just flip through and get into the research here. So we did the research, the study last year, and I believe, and Mike's crew is the ones that adjudicated this and put it out there. But last year we had right around 500 responses across the country, and this year, at this point in time, and we're still collecting data incidentally. So if your club hasn't put in data for this, we would love to get it. And I have a list of MGA clubs here that in this report that are part of this right now. This year we have close to 800 clubs here. So it's a big topic, especially when it comes to the dues increases. So you can see here the respondents by club type and the profile of that, which region of the country they were in. And I run Club Benchmarking's Mid-Atlantic office, which includes Long Island, New York City, Norton, and New Jersey, and then my associate Chris Barron handles the MGA clubs that are north of New York City and into Connecticut. This is giving you some background there. But you see the Mid-Atlantic response rate at 134, and the New England at 66, just to give you an idea of how many clubs are in this. This is a national map of the response we have, so it's pretty widespread. You can see the heavy cluster of the Northeast there, where we're seeing good participation. Here are the MGA clubs that are in the study. We don't call out any one club in any of this, so it's all aggregated so that there's not, we don't reveal, in other words, your club's information remains very, very confidential. But just to give you an idea, there's 46 MGA clubs here, and we would like to see more in the data. So, you know, the difficulty in finding staff, that's been there. I mean, who would have thought? I mean, when you go back to 2020, and I remember thinking and watching what was happening in the industry, not just club industry, but the hotel and restaurant industry. It was disheartening. You see the number of closures that were going on and the number of people that were out of work. On the flip side of that, we were thinking, boy, when this thing turns back on, there's probably going to be a lot of people that are looking for jobs. Well, that didn't materialize. As people left this business or left the hospitality business, seemingly for good. And now we're left with a situation where it's very difficult to find people. This graphic shows from left to right how it is that, attracting labor in North America. Now, the Mid-Atlantic region is the gray bar here. So this year, it's anywhere from extremely difficult to moderately difficult to slightly difficult. In other words, it's difficult. All right? You hardly see anybody down in the very easy areas of the right side of this chart. If you compare this to last year it was tilted more to the extremely difficult, where this year it's more moderately difficult. So it would suggest that it's improving somewhat, although still very difficult. This is the MGA. This is the 46 clubs that we have at MGA. So it really mirrors the national if you look at it there. So 22% of the clubs still say that it's extremely difficult, and 47% saying it's moderately difficult. So still a preponderance of this. So it's a difficult scenario out there finding staff. And that's the difference too from last year to this year. You'll see last year it was 62% said it was extremely difficult and 37% moderately, and no one said it was easy. So hourly wages, we looked at the hourly wages from excuse me, yeah. The bottom line is that your hourly wages make up about 25% of your entire expense budget across the club. Another 5% is going to be in your payroll-related expenses on that. So it's probably your single largest expense that you have. I think we all know that. So as hourly wages increase, the pressure on wages increase, that's going to push that 25% a little higher. So it's an important thing from a strategic standpoint. And so when you put it into context of what we were talking about before about the member experience, and the fact that there's more members in clubs these days than there were maybe 2 years ago in general. How do we reconcile the fact, and how do we maintain our membership experience while maintaining some semblance of being able to break even on the operation? Mike said before that the preponderance of clubs try to break even on their operating statement or their income statement. Well, if we're seeing so much some pressure on us, in fact, I can tell you that in 2021, clubs are generally having a pretty good time on the operating statement. So the median in the industry was putting about 4% of an operating surplus. A lot of reasons for that, but the biggest reason was the government money from COVID, the ERTC or PPP, whichever one you participated in, and not both. Now, a lot of that went away in 2022. So what we're seeing right now, and what I'm dealing with a lot in the Mid-Atlantic region, I'm dealing with a lot of clubs that are halfway through their fiscal year, and they have what we would call a hockey stick recovery going on. So let's say they had several $100,000 of operating surplus in 2021. Well, looking ahead at 2022, they're tracking to a deficit of about the equal amount, if not more. And one of the reasons, there's a lot of reasons for that, but we're going to get into that when we talk about dues, because that's probably the biggest culprit of that thing. So the membership experience pressure is very high. The wage inflation area, the cost of goods and products and supplies has gone sky high, but maybe dues was a lagging indicator in some of these cases. So here I show the wages in Mid-Atlantic, and you can take a look at this at your leisure. This is kind of an eye chart, but it kind of looks back at 2019, 2021, and 2022. So the takeaway here is that since 2019, in the Mid-Atlantic, between 11 and 35%, wage increases have been a magnitude of 11 to 35% over the 10 positions that we've outlined. Looking at it from an MGA perspective, this is average wages, 2019, 2021, 2022. And if you look at the Mid-Atlantic and compare that to the MGA, it's very consistent, very consistent. And that's the other takeaway on this. On the national standpoint, the wage increase magnitude and scope has been fairly consistent across the board from region to region. So it's not just one part of the country. So we have 800 clubs reporting in And even though it's self-reporting data, in other words, we're not pulling it from accounting records or anything like that, you can trust the fact that this is pretty widespread and it's consistent. And here's the average MGA wages in these 10 positions, going back to 2019, average maximum wage, excuse me. And again, pretty consistent when you look at it from a national perspective to your micro-region perspective. Now, just to keep you, so you know, and anybody that's interested in seeing your club specifically next to the MGA data or your club next to national, I can produce that report for you. Happy to do that, especially if your data's in here. If your data's not in, we'll get it in and do that report for you. We can also break it down into the micro MGA regions like East End Long Island, Western Long Island, all of Long Island, New Jersey, and then Westchester County, and so on and so forth. So if we have enough clubs in there, we only need about 8 or 9 clubs in each to get a pretty good sample set to show your club next to the clubs that are in your neighborhood. We can do that, and I'm going to offer to do that as a complimentary service to you now. This chart here just shows you position by position and how it stacks up region by region, and on the bottom of each square is the national average. And you'll see that the Mid-Atlantic and the New England numbers mirror very closely the national. So it's funny, I would have conversations with folks either in New York City or Long Island, and they're lamenting the fact that they got to pay a cook $25 an hour. I think the biggest problem is that $25 an hour cook probably doesn't have a whole lot of experience these days, as opposed to the guys and gals you would have had prior to 2019. But that's a different story. And they say, well, that can only be happening here in this metropolitan area. And I said, well, no, it's pretty similar to what's happening in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, to be quite honest with you. So the same pressures are everywhere. Now, there might be some difference in cost of living, that will put some other pressures on it as well. So here's the context on the hourly wages that I was referring to earlier. So 90% of your head count in the industry is going to be hourly. So wages represent approximately 45% of the club's overall expenses, and your hourly is going to be about 25% of your total. So let's get the dues increases for a minute here. If you've heard Ray or any of us before, you've probably seen a slide a graphic where we put up a slide that shows 3 buckets: red bucket, yellow bucket, green bucket. Is everyone familiar with that? Okay. Yeah. There's the difference between the red buckets and the green buckets can be, Mike put up a slide earlier that showed the impact of marginal decisions on the margin. The green bucket clubs tend to lean towards the membership experience when they're faced with costs or problems to overcome. In other words, raising the cost of joining, for instance, or belonging. The red bucket clubs tend to lean towards cost cutting or cost containment or something along those lines in an attempt to keep dues low. You're going to see a slide here on how dues increases are either being handled in 2023 or being planned to be handled. So when we did this research, a lot of clubs are in the process of budgeting. They hadn't decided what their dues increase is going to be, but they had an idea of what it's going to be, and that's what you're going to see here. There are a number of clubs that we've told that know what their costs were, and they know what their dues increase is, and they'll be reflected in here as well. But you can almost see the red, yellow, and green buckets in the data. Now that's anecdotal on my part, but I would suggest that the clubs that are going forward with 3 to 4% increases last year and this year, I imagine a good portion of those would measure out in the red bucket from a KPI standpoint. And the clubs that are in the 10, 15 to 20% increase in dues are most likely the clubs that lean into the membership experience versus clubs that don't lean into the membership experience or look towards the efficiencies. So here's the national dues increase data. And you'll see here, this is all roughly 681 clubs of the data that reported on the dues. right? The ones that had the dues that were set, that lower left-hand box, the 25th percentile is 5%. The median is almost 8%, and the 75th is 10%. That's nationwide. And then the ones where the dues are not yet set, but they're in the planning stages, it's very similar at 5, 6, and 8, almost 9. And you can see there's a pretty steep climb. If you look at that upper quartile there, it begins at the 10% range and goes on up towards and above 30%. Can you imagine? This is the MGA. These are the 46 member clubs in MGA. It's very similar, but you can see there's about 25% of the clubs that are in the 2.5% to 4% range, about 50% that are between 5% and 7%, and 25% that are above 9% and going above 12%. So my hypothesis would be that, I would compare this against our red bucket, green bucket, and yellow bucket metrics, and then probably it would sort out pretty close to this. So from a strategic standpoint, and you want to talk about efficiencies, don't confuse efficiency with innovation. There are innovative ways to address your staffing concerns with a lack of staffing. And I've heard a lot of them by talking to managers and board members over the last couple of months. And they would be better ones to talk to than I. But those are the clubs that are leaning into a higher dues increase going into 2023 versus the lower dues increase. Other thing on dues increases, and we found that in 2021, or going back to 2019 even, this is as you see the blue line here, this is a 2019 or pre-pandemic year. So you see the median dues increase is 4%, with the 75th percentile at 7%. If you look at the 2023 outlook at 5, 6, and 9%, it's about 50% higher in 2023 than it would have been in 2019. So that's pretty interesting when you think about that. Now, dues increases tend to be more of a lagging indicator because we're finding that clubs want to keep that dues increase as low as they possibly can and maybe put more of a reliance on non-dues revenue. Because in the club business model, club dues, operating dues specific, and non-dues revenues come together to form that membership experience. And so, yes, sir?
You're plotting this data in a lot of really helpful ways. Do you look at the data based on starting point for dues? So starting point. So if your dues are over $30,000, for instance, what type of annual increases are you getting versus if it's 10 to 20 or under 10?
We can filter that. I could answer that for you, not this minute, but I could demonstrate it for you in the, and it's going to be across the board. It's actually going to map out, because I've looked at this in a couple of different cases where you have clubs like the MGA, where your median dues right now is around $14,000 a year here in this part of the country. And some clubs are higher than that here, especially, anyway, you know that. Whereas nationally, the median dues are around $9,000. So when we go ahead and filter that based on dues levels, this chart here, that 2%, 4%, 5%, it'll look very much the same. So the answer to your question is yes, we do and can do that, and yet it doesn't change the percentile rates that you see there. It's very interesting. Yeah. So I guess my point from a strategic point of view is, which way does your club lean when it comes to addressing the inflationary issues that we have from an operating standpoint? And what innovations can you employ that will maintain that membership experience while also taking into account the fact that you probably have less headcount in your hourly positions than you might have had a couple of years ago, while also knowing that you have more members. So just some questions. And of course we would say, and Mike pointed out earlier, that leaning towards that membership experience. In other words, the expense per full member equivalent is an important metric. So is an important metric is the dues ratio to operating revenue. So the higher that ratio is, let's say 52 to 55%, the less likely is that your non-dues revenues is going to be as impactful. So you're going to be amenitizing more of your operation than relying on, say, the margin from your non-dues revenues. This gives you dues increases by region. You'll see the Mid-Atlantic, and you'll see New England, which would be the closest regions here. Some of you are probably involved in clubs in the Southeast or other parts of the country, and you can see the breakout there as well. By club type, you'll see it's very consistent across different club types. You're probably a number of members here of city clubs, for instance. City and athletic clubs are in the same, they're measuring the same way, they're measuring the same things that country clubs and golf clubs are. So how are clubs dealing with inflation? So nationally, 67% or 2/3 of the clubs said that they're doing things to impact or to mitigate the inflationary pressures on cost of goods and wages. About a third said they aren't. In the MGA, it's about 50-50. So that would suggest that maybe the fact that your dues revenues are a little higher than they are in some parts of the country might be affecting how you addressed inflation. You know, maybe there's some other aspects there as well, but that would be one thing that I would look at from a hypothetical standpoint. And here's nationally, here are some of the things that clubs are doing to address inflation. The top being increased menu pricing, increased dues, increased member count, and increased green fees, not down the line. And then where has inflation impacted your club the most? F&B's at the top at 90% nationally, and wages are equal to that at about 90% as well. And then on down to the operation. At the MGA, it's very, very similar. You'll see the increased menu prices was 96%, increased dues 40%, so very similar to the national result. And of course, the impact, or where is it coming from? In the MGA, it's coming from wages primarily, but it's equal to food and beverage. So we look at the foreign labor aspect nationally. 79% of clubs are not using foreign labor. Those that do say that they're able to get the desired number of foreign workers. 60% say that they are able to do it, and 81% are looking forward and they're able to get the number of foreign workers that they want. Now in the MGA, there are some parts of the country, like for instance Philadelphia, is not as reliant on foreign workers as maybe you are in the metropolitan area. But 54% of your respondents rely on it or use it. And you were able to, 76% said they were able to get the desired numbers, and 92% expect to be able to continue that. So, interesting data. So, I mentioned a couple of times, a couple of reports that we can do for you. And that's, we can do this labor and dues report by MGA region. In other words, we can do it by New York clubs, New Jersey clubs, Long Island clubs. I realize that Long Island's in New York. And then we can do the report with your club next to any number of groups. So including East End, Western Long Island, all of Long Island, New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, or all MGA. So we're able to do that as long as we have your data, we can put that in. We also do, and we offered this last year to people that attended the President's Council, and that is a complimentary net worth and balance sheet report. We believe that net worth over time is probably the most important metric the club should be tracking. And so it's the most important metric that members should be concerned with because it deals with the amount of capital income coming into the club and whether or not you're penetrating and exceeding your depreciation numbers over time. It also talks about an important metric called the net to gross property, plant, and equipment ratio. So that's the freshness factor. So that gives you an indication of how fresh your club's assets are and how much that is oscillating from year to year based on what you're doing from a debt standpoint or capital income and what your depreciation is doing. We also run a benchmarking platform, which is a subscription service offered by Club Benchmarking. And the way I like to do this is talk to clubs, get your financial data into the platform before you even decide to subscribe. And then we'll come in and do a review with you on the metrics that you've submitted and see if there's any value in seeing that on an annual basis. And of course, we do the strategic monthly dashboard for MGA. It's a free service. From that, you'll be able to see on a month-to-month basis what's going on in your peer set for the cost of joining, what's happening in initiation fees, whether you have a wait list or not, how many clubs have a wait list, and other important financial metrics that you can customize within that. So it's a very powerful platform, and every 30 days it's updated, and we have close to 500 clubs nationwide that are involved in that, and we'd like to see more from your group here. So my contact information is on here, as well as Chris Barron, who handles the north of the city, and I handle Long Island, New York City, and New Jersey. So with that, are there any questions? Yes, sir.
Hey, Ken, the hourly wages survey, do you have a salary wages for a manager, business manager, SMB?
We constantly benchmark the leadership positions, and so yes, we can do that specifically for your. I don't have it in this deck, but some of that information is a little sensitive, so we're happy to do that online.
All right.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Of the percentage of, the clubs in the MGA that on the 78 or 75 percentile dues increase that you're seeing that 9% and above, is that year over year, or do you see that some clubs in a particular year may have to raise that 9%, but then the next year they're back down at a more medium number?
It moves. It moves with what you need to do. What we advocate, though, is a more forward-looking aspect of dues increases as opposed to a look back. What we're seeing right now is clubs that may have, I got to be careful with the words here, but the clubs that may have had some ERTC money in 2021 and said, hey, because we have that, we don't necessarily need to. We recognize that we need more dues, but this year we're going to keep it at normal levels, and we'll see what happens next year. Those are the clubs that I've run into that are having that, what I call that hockey stick recovery situation, because they're not funding their operating footprint to the fullest they can because they held back on the dues increase. So it does move from year to year, but what we are seeing is that last year the dues increases people were looking forward to for 2022, on average, were a percentage or two at each quartile break lower than they are looking forward to 2023. And some of the 2023 is a reaction to maybe not raising dues enough in 2021, or maybe not looking forward and saying, okay, what's this inflationary period going to do to our membership experience?
I haven't heard any updates yet, but yeah. So I
No, because it's tough. It's it's easy to spend it, but then if it gets challenged and you lose, you got to
yeah,
get
but
back.
I think when it comes to the ERTC, it's basically you're taking a credit on payroll taxes that you would have paid, right? So to Ken's point, there should really be no delta, when it comes to the operating budget itself.
Provided that you reserve it.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Thanks.
Do most clubs in the MGA distinguish between single memberships and family memberships?
It varies across the board. So when we do our data, we try to focus on the FME, the full member equivalent. And when we work with the club and the platform, we ask them specifically how they measure what a full membership is so that we can get apples to apples. That's not to say that it's absolute, but for the most part, that's been a good metric for us. Because it is, in fact, the more membership categories you have, or the more you split between family and single, the more fragmented it becomes and more difficult it becomes to get an absolute measurement on that. But we do work and really try hard to get that full member equivalent as close to reality as we can get it. But it does vary. Yes, sir.
A quick question. When you looked at the hourly wages, especially in the Mid-Atlantic, what percentage would you say were union employees versus non-union employees?
Oh, it's heavily tilted to non-union, unless you're talking about the city clubs where they're predominantly union. I didn't include the city clubs in this subset. I could have and probably should have, but there's some different issues there, obviously. It seems like many of the union houses that I work with have been out of contract for some time and are getting ready to negotiate new CBAs, which is going to be interesting to see. But we don't discern union versus non-union in this data.
Any other questions? No? Okay, thank you, Ken.
Thank you, folks.